Hey Tim, how are you? How are you?
Good morning, Russ. How are we? Yeah, very well, thank you.
Good, mate. Good. Welcome everyone. Another live stream with Secolve, and this time Dull. Looking forward to today. Really exciting technology to talk about. How have you been, Tim? It's already March. Can you believe it?
Oh, it's flown by, hasn't it? It accelerates once we hit Australia Day. It all just
Yeah.
rapidly fires away. Yeah.
Year just disappears. It shows we're getting old, mate. That's what it is. Yeah. I'll just wait for everyone to join. We've just gone live. Yeah, welcome everyone. Today we're going to touch on Dull and our new partnership, the capability of Dull. So yeah, welcome along. Please ask as many questions as you like today. We'll do our best to address those, and just write in the comments below the live stream you're watching. We'll pull those up and ask Tim. We'll do introductions shortly. Tim is definitely the expert you want to be asking those questions to at Dull. But first of all, we've got a Secolve OT meetup coming up. This time it's in Manchester in the UK. So for those global viewers of ours, please get along next Thursday. We'll be getting all the OT crew from around Manchester and the UK together. Looking forward to it. So yeah, we might kick on with intros, Tim. We'll be around for the next 20 or so minutes, guys. But yeah, Tim, over to you. Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Russ. And interesting you say about Manchester as well, because I'm originally from the UK. I moved to Australia in 2018, and I've spent the last 8 years or so working for an NDR vendor, which I'm sure a few guys on the call might be familiar with. But I joined Dell last year as their head of solutions engineering. And as you've mentioned, we're a fairly recently founded cybersecurity vendor, and we're basically trying to bring zero trust network access into the OT space. And the first thing people always ask is not what you do; it's why you're called Dull, basically. So I'll answer that one before we get that asked in the chat. And the reason behind it is essentially we've got this fantastic technology. We've got this cutting edge networking product. And our aim is really just to make cybersecurity boring, right? Cybersecurity, OT security should be dull. But yeah, aside from the great tech and the funny name, it's been a fantastic journey so far working for one of the very few Australian vendors out there.
Yeah, it's great to hear we've got another Australian partner come on board. So how long have you been around? It's great to hear you're Australian. Yeah.
Yeah, well, a couple of years. And so, yeah, I think the last few years we spent really just building out the product, understanding what the
Right.
market needs and wants. And yeah,
Yep.
now it's over the last few months we've started taking it to market and partnering with other, great Australian organizations like yourself, for us.
Yeah, well, it's a massive challenge I'm finding speaking with people all across the sectors. So really keen to hear more about what it is you do. Let's start on that. So challenges that you're solving. Please explain.
Yeah, no, and again, like I said, with our focus on kind of like OT zero trust network access, the primary challenge I guess that we're solving is secure and remote access. And for anyone that isn't aware with secure remote access or SRA, it really is what it says on the tin. It's really just about facilitating connectivity to assets within your OT network working remotely, right? And benefiting from the productivity gains that can offer without necessarily compromising on security. And yeah, there's a fair few solutions out in the market, but there's really nothing out there that's ticking all of the boxes for customers from an OT security perspective. And I won't open this, can of worms, but essentially it's always to do with that IT/OT convergence. And yeah, you see a lot of customers who introduce IT-based remote access solutions into their OT environment. They find there's deficiencies in that from a security perspective, and then they end up having to wrap around a load of compensating controls around that solution, and then they wonder why the user experience is so poor. And that's really the trade-off that we see in those environments, and essentially that's what we're looking to fix. So we're looking to provide a solution that's been built from the ground up with OT security in mind, and ease of use in mind as well. And if we get that right, we can solve a lot of the other challenges. Which, from a challenges perspective, things like standardizing third-party access, right? there's always, everyone's got that horror story of, the vendor that drops in the 4G router into the environment to make remote access easier, which is great, but from a security perspective, it doesn't necessarily fly. So regulated industries, SOC compliant customers, you can't afford to do that. So you need a cohesive yet secure solution that complies to industry standards and essentially reduces business risk.
Yeah, I hear plenty of user, I'll call them horror stories about user access and usability. Working with oil and gas or water sector, just the amount of jump boxes they typically have to navigate through just to perform their work. But then the issues of just having no visibility of what third parties are doing on this remote
Yeah.
access architecture, it can get quite complicated, I imagine, after several years of having this architecture in place,
Yeah, well,
We'll touch
even
on.
a jump host, right? It's a recommended solution, and even when it's deployed optimally, it still introduces residual risk into the environment, and that's basically down to its architecture of requiring connectivity from the low trust zone, which is effectively the OTDMZ, into the higher trust zone where your field devices sit, right? And although it is recommended, if we can kind of shift that narrative on its head and have things connecting from high trust to low trust, we can meet a lot of the requirements that customers are asking for.
Yeah, for sure. I've been reading a lot of threat intelligence reports. Some recently came out in the last week or so. It's always kind of a target is the remote access architecture. Can you touch on, I guess, how threat actors are taking advantage of that?
Yeah, and that's a good question. And again, I've pinched a few stats, or I've been reading a few stats from some of the threat reports that have been released recently. But I mean, at a high level, one of the things that makes remote access so important is basically it's one of SANS's 5 critical controls. And for anyone that isn't familiar with those 5 critical controls, it's essentially SANS, one of the most widely respected bodies in the OT security space. They've analyzed all known OT attacks, and they've tried to find the most important controls that would have effectively mitigated or reduced risk of these controls. And secure remote access, along with a few others, came kind of fourth on the list. And yeah, it's that exploitation of public-facing infrastructure that can be so damaging, that you do see with traditional remote access solutions, because when they are compromised, they act as essentially a perfect launch point to, do some lateral movement, network scanning, escalation, and privileges. And then you compound that with the fact that so many customers, I think 65%, don't quote me on that, but 65% of organizations haven't necessarily got these controls implemented properly, either from a network architecture or from a patching perspective. It's really no surprise that more than half of I think it was ransomware incidents involve secure remote access at some point in the chain, right? A remote access solution compromised or exploited to get that. And yeah, these figures are all pulled from the recent threat reports that have been released. I'd really recommend having a look at them. They're great to hear from a kind of at the coalface perspective. And guys like Dragos are pumping out great reports on some of the attacks that we do see from APTs and ransomware actors. And yeah, there's recent ones like the Ivanti VPN compromise. They come up daily, but looking further back as well, you see things like Citrix Bleed and other well-known attacks. So they're not going away. Is probably the thing that I would take away from some of those reports.
Yeah, I mean, traditional remote access is always there, right? When we spoke a couple of weeks ago, I like the fact that you don't need permanent architecture in place for remote access all of the time. Something that you offer is kind of temporary access in, full visibility in. Is that right?
Yeah, it's fairly ephemeral. It's probably the way to describe it. And it's pretty much down to the way the solution's deployed, I guess, because they're fairly novel in the OT space, and that we use. It's a software-defined solution that's basically delivered using a software application that's deployed within assets within the OT environment. And obviously, this raises a few eyebrows in amongst the diehard OT contingent out there, but essentially, the reason we've architected it that way is to allow this ephemeral kind of nature and flexibility when you're actually building out a deployment. So you can deploy a dull software agent on an existing jump host, right? And then get the benefits of our zero trust and application level granularity just from a single agent deployed in the environment. Or you might want to, deploy it a little further down into the purging model and look at covering your engineering workstations. And they can be used to facilitate access at each site locally. But then, the list goes on. So you can also have an out-of-band solution that's deployed on a virtual machine or dedicated hardware, right? However it's deployed, the key is the software is communicating outbound. It's providing ephemeral access. We can use, a virtual desktop environment if required to provision access and temporary access. But essentially what we're trying to build is an entirely secure solution that doesn't poke holes in your existing defenses to provide remote access to your environment.
Yeah, great. Well, we can get into the technical details at a later date. If anyone's interested in seeing more, we'll touch more on it a little later, but you can reach out to Tim or I after this. Let's elaborate a bit more on the solution deployment then, Tim. Can you give us a couple of use cases, run through a couple of different customers and I guess their situation and how you've moved them towards Dull?
Yeah, and that's the thing about OT security is that it's a bit of a journey, right? And one of the common themes that we do see is using Dull as your remote access solution to enforce a bit of that application level segmentation or granularity in less mature environments, right? Less mature environments that may not yet have segregated and isolated their machines into zones and conduits and whatever that might be. Or they might currently be using something like a VPN to access a solution to their environment. By implementing Dull, you can really narrow down exactly what you're accessing. And again, to go back to that example of a 4G router being deployed, we've helped a few customers, particularly in the water industry. I think we've got a use case on that we can share. But there were various 4G routers deployed within their environment, and what they needed was a consistent, singular solution that all of their remote vendors could use and their internal users could use as well to centralize their auditing, centralize their access. And we were obviously able to deliver that with minimal impact. Again, being software deployed, it makes it very easy to get this solution installed. And yeah, again, on that auditing perspective, a lot of what we're finding at the moment is customers just have no idea who or when is accessing their assets. And it seems crazy, right? Because we're so used to, having quite strict controls in IT and things like that. But in OT, it's a bit of a wild west around vendors remoting in at any time and outside of maintenance windows and change windows. So being able to very granularly audit who and when is connecting in has obviously helped out a lot of customers, and also know whether they're meeting their SLAs, right? And part of that is providing visibility of, or providing a second layer of approval is probably how I think about it. So rather than a third party, an OEM, just remoting in when they feel like it through a VPN and a jump host, one of the things that we can provide is what we call service side MFA. And that's essentially the OEM or the third party has to pass their first level of, credentials, and then they have to do their MFA challenge. But then another MFA challenge is passed to the site owner or the customer, right, or the plant manager, and they see, hey, this third party is trying to connect in. It's connected to this, maintenance window, and I'm looking to do maintenance on this PLC, for example. So providing that additional level of visibility is something that a lot of customers have never had before, and it's been a bit of a game changer.
Yeah, the way you explained previously to me, once that access is approved, the limited access, the connectivity in, I like that feature as well. So you kind of restrict what they can do in a way, right?
Yeah, and I think that's what people are so used to with some of the traditional tools out there. Okay, so even with a VPN, even with a jump host, unless it's incredibly locked down, you are really just providing someone with an IP address in that network or that segment that they can use to access the environment. Right? And that's a risk in itself, because obviously you expose yourself to lateral movement. If something is compromised on that machine, it can spread, that kind of thing. What we're doing, and part of the zero trust nature of it, is providing access down to the granular application level. Right? So we don't give you access to the entire workstation. We might just give you access to the HTTP interface or the telnet interface on a PLC, rather than the entire view like that you get with something like RDP.
Yeah, great. Compliance obligations.
Yeah,
How do
that's
you
a
help
biggie.
customers with that? Yeah.
Yeah, that's a big topic, isn't it? And there's two levels to it, really. I always think when it comes to compliance, one is the kind of non-obligated compliance, i.e., like the best practices, and then there's the industry regulated stuff. And if you take a look at the kind of non-obligated side of things, like alignment to 62443 and things like that, the ability for Dell to retain almost the sanctity of those environments that you've spent such a long time building, right? These zones and the conduits. Traditionally, when you enter or you implement a remote access solution, you have to punch holes through all those zones to provide access. What we've been able to do is, because we have this outbound only architecture, you can kind of retain that control of those zones and enforce that one-way communication. Another recent one, again on the kind of guidelines perspective, was this month or last month, I think it was, the ASD released their modern defensible architecture kind of guidance, and that was all built around zero trust and secure by design kind of architectures, which kind of underpins our entire approach to remote access. So it's great to see that kind of being mandated or recommended within the environment. But then obviously you've got things like SOCI and Essential 8, and we've got some great examples of helping customers achieve the different maturity levels of Essential 8 just by being designed around MFA and segmented access. And then for SOCI customers, obviously our flexible hosting options, fully on-prem, and just the fact that we're an Australian vendor as well, right? It's been a massive tick in the box for a lot of customers when it comes to compliance.
Yeah, for sure. That'll go a long way. We've had a question pop in, Tim, from Damien. Those sessions that are established, are they monitored or recorded?
Yeah, good question, Damien. So yeah, all of those sessions are recorded by default, essentially, and they can be shadowed and terminated in real time. And that's one of the benefits, I guess, really giving that visibility, and you can watch in real time as a vendor's accessing your most critical systems. And if they start doing something that you don't want, you can obviously flick them off fairly quickly.
Yeah, awesome. Finally, software-based solution. How are deployments done to, let's say, PLCs, RTUs, those types of assets? Because you mentioned agents before.
Yeah, that's a good question. That's a great question. So typically we will try and avoid deploying on those kind of field devices as such. The reason behind that is essentially it's not just a compatibility thing, right? So these software applications that we've built have been designed to be pretty much compatible with everything we can, but we don't necessarily want to deploy in those assets, because what you'll find is that that's not just compatibility, it's maintenance and warranties that you might be falling foul of. So we'll generally recommend deploying a little further upstream, typically on an engineering workstation, and then provisioning that access from the agent that's deployed on that workstation, and then accessing it by that instead.
Gotcha. Okay. And logging, we've had another question come through from Gavin. Key logging, is that a feature?
That is a great question, and the answer to that one is currently not yet. But we actually had a big tech day last week to discuss some of the requirements that we were looking to implement next quarter, and key logging was a fantastic example of that that we're hoping to introduce, because again, you might not want to have to sit there and watch an entire session recording of a remote user, but it might be a lot easier to scan through the inputs that they've entered. So that's something that we're definitely looking at doing, and there's an awful lot of things that we're looking to wrap around that kind of thing as well. So even just building a summary based on the recording and kind of the key logging of what's occurred within that environment, and then you can very quickly share that and get a quick glance at what someone might have done without having to review all those key logs and session recordings and things like that.
Yeah, great. Awesome. Well, thanks, Tim. We're coming up towards 20 minutes now. It's been been great to get a high-level overview. As we touched on before, guys, please reach out to myself or Tim, and we're happy to give a further in-depth technical overview, share whatever information you may have. Our next meetup is coming up next Thursday in Manchester. There's the link to Secolve and Dull. Feel free to reach Tim or on LinkedIn as well. And we can provide you with further technical kind of demos or fire up a proof of concept, whatever it may be. Great to talk, Tim. Hopefully chat again soon, mate. And thanks for today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Talk soon. Cheers.